Good afternoon and welcome to the second discussion series or the second discussion round on exploring platform alternatives, shaping a responsible future. And in this discussion series, we seek to explore kind of alternatives to existing platform models, platform arrangements, including, of course, business models, corporate structure, and data sharing topics, of course. And my name is Stefan Bohn. I'm today the moderator. I'm here for Alina. Unfortunately, she's not feeling perfect today, and but she's in the Zoom call, as you can see Alina here. And Alina has organized the discussion talk, and I will moderate it today. I'm also a member of the INCA team. INCA is a project about alternative platforms, and I'm also a member, like Alina, of the HIIG Berlin. So the host, it's the Humboldt Institute for Internet Society. It's based in Berlin, in Germany, and it's a research institute. And we are investigating a lot of questions around new technologies and societal impact, or the impact of new technologies for society, or the other way around. And our topic today, as you know, is data sharing, and whether data sharing can be a viable strategy in platform competition. So first question from my side, before introducing, of course, the speakers, is what is data sharing for you? We have quite a bit of time. So from my perspective, of course, I have some notes from Alina. So data sharing, she mentioned data sharing is, of course, a messy, or could be really messy, because to be successful, many parties or stakeholders must be involved in data sharing. So it's a kind of complicated process. And it's also kind of envious because as a competitor, you can use data of your other competitors to succeed. So it's a kind of a crazy strategy from an organizational perspective or a strategy perspective, but it could be also a really playful thing to share data and to make use of data for very different questions and find new strategies. So it's an interesting topic, and maybe we could share some of the insights of our group about data sharing. We could start maybe with Christian or Julia or Annalena. What do you think about data sharing? What's your perspective? And then, of course, we will go to Timo and Inge. Christian, would you like to start and speak a little bit about your perspective about data sharing?
Hi, Christian Hanke here. I'm from Erasmus University, Rotterdam. And my camera isn't working, as you can see. I can click and then it turns off again. If anybody has a tip, I'd like to hear it. And now, data sharing for me is basically a commons, right? That's a framework that I find really useful. Elinor Ostrom and so on. And so you have the problem to have a reciprocal, mutually beneficial arrangement where trust is really important, because otherwise you might easily run into an asymmetric information problem, and the fact that people try to take more from the commons than they contribute to the sustenance of a shared practice. In all honesty, I'm riffing here. I didn't come prepared for that question, but that's how I would spontaneously respond to this question.
Yeah, of course, I like the commons perspective. And then let's go to Annalena. What's your perspective?
Hi, everyone. So I work at Algorithm Watch, and we're investigating platforms. And my role is to actually build software to audit and look into platforms and how their algorithms work. Mm-hmm. So my interest in data sharing has been so far about data donations, because the platforms are not very open. It's really hard to investigate them. And with the DSA on the rise, we're looking more into audits. So that's the other perspective. And then in general, really, I'm interested in the future of platforms and what they could look like. And commons, of course, is one aspect, but business models are on the other side and really, really important. And so I just joined this talk to hear more opinions and to see what's out there that's being discussed right now.
Yeah, sounds good. So it's also a broad perspective and a broad interest. So what's with you also, Julia or Alina, you also like to share some ideas, some insights, some perspectives?
Hi, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Giulia Renzi. I work for the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia in Italy. I'm interested in data sharing because I'm working on a project. It's called Mobi Data Lab, and it's focusing on trying to discover how to spread the data sharing culture in Europe through different analyses, hackathons, meetings, workshops, and so on. In particular, I'm interested in how the ecosystems can encourage data sharing. And for me, data sharing, since I'm focusing especially on mobility, is the sharing of information, not just strictly related to the means of transport, but also related to the habits of people, so that in future we can offer actually smarter modes of transport.
So another perspective. Sounds really interesting. And what's with you, Alina? Would you also like to say a few words? Because I mean, it's actually it's your idea to have this session, and was your initiative, and it's really good to have you here. I mean, of course, you feel not well, but you are at least here. That's great.
Yeah, I cannot really think really properly because of the fever that I'm having because of the corona. So I think that for me, the interest in data sharing is how does it work on the practical level, actually, because it seems to be an interesting concept. But I think that's why I offered these three words: messy, envious, but it also can be playful because you can create something new with this. But I think it's a really complicated structure, and it's really complicated at the level of the infrastructure, at the level of governance. And I really hope that today with the presentation with Timo and Inge and Stefan, I think we will try to answer these questions.
Thanks, Alina. And maybe I could also share some of my ideas, because my background is also in the area of open source as one of the strategies to have also more data sharing at the end. And I'm always interested in this kind of paradigmatic change from a more closed system to a more open system. And of course, data sharing is a really important topic. Then let's go to the speakers, and I could introduce our speakers. We have Inka here and we have Timo. I could start with Inka. I mean, Inka is an associate professor of competition law at the Tilburg University in the Netherlands, and she specializes especially on platform regulation. And we invited Inka because she published a lot of papers about the role of data in platform competition and the role of policy. And then we have a second speaker. Our second speaker is Timo Sepälä, and he's a university lecturer in operations management at the Aalto University in Finland. And Timo also works closely with the industry, with a lot of industry projects, so at the intersection of academia and industry. And we were really excited to read one of his reports on data sharing in the food industry, and wanted, of course, to learn more about how data sharing is working in reality, so behind the conceptual question. So welcome, Timo and Inka, and I would suggest that we start with Timo's presentation. So okay. Timo, the floor is all yours.
All right. So let me share my PowerPoint. I hope that you can see my presentation. Yeah, I prepared a short presentation from my perspective on this topic, and basically this is kind of a short introduction to that what had happened in the past. And what had happened in the past with the industrial companies especially, and basically, well, as we all know that nowadays we are talking about the APIs, but in the 1970s that when the first computers got into the picture and into the corporate use, we were basically talking about EDI. And for me, basically, today's APIs they are a synonym to EDIs that were built sort of as an interface between sort of computers to exchange data from company to company. During that period of time, all the data sharing that was done through these interfaces was basically related to the operational data, like product orders and order acknowledgements and invoices and payments. And so there was a lot of data sharing, and basically the reason for all these activities happening within the company, the reason was that way we can remove sort of the duplicate work related to these order processing and invoicing activities between the companies. So it was really about removing duplicate working tasks from two sides of an organization. So all these activities that were sort of done during that period of time under sort of a data sharing were mainly related to the operational efficiencies, and that was basically quite a big of a driver for that the productivity of the companies went up, because then they were basically capable of removing a duplicate work from the sort of different sides of the company borders. Then basically somewhere around 2000s, the internet came, and the messaging system or the data sharing systems were changed, and then we started talking a lot about the complementarities and how the complementarities can be added into the product and service portfolios of the companies that who were offering a different type of products and services, and basically for that then companies started to share strategic information related to their customers and their customer requests, so that these companies were actually then capable, or these complementarity companies were actually capable of creating new types of innovations for the final customer, and without basically a company who was actually owning the customer not taking any role over that. And then of course that when iPhones and those came out, we started seeing that okay, these complementaries matter much more when it comes to this type of B2C offering that which was then offered to the consumers to the mobile phone platform. So basically that is from my perspective. So what I'm trying to say here is that there has been a data sharing between the companies for the last 50 years, more or less, and however sort of a data sharing have been for different type of purposes. So earlier it was creating more type of an operational efficiency between the companies, and today we are talking more about the creating new type of strategic opportunities for different type of manufacturers or developers with their products. So that's very sort of a shortly my view to history of data sharing. Any questions or comments? Okay, if not, so let's then move to the near history, and basically I'm not taking sort of a industrial perspective into this, and I'm starting from the legislation perspective, and this is actually that this is also very much related to what happened on the mobile phone platforms. Basically, how it goes when it comes to legislation. The ownership of a device or any assets is basically the default situation of data management when no contractual arrangements or like have been made. And in fact, that was the way for the platform companies. They basically changed the way about how contracts are being used when the consumers are participating. We all know that every single time we are downloading a software from the platform, we are agreeing for the data sharing rights, and this is exactly the same when it comes to industrial companies. So whoever owns a machine within the plant, they basically own the access for the data that the machine is generating within that environment. And there is no other way to get around that, because the contracts are basically two-party contracts. So every single time you want to basically share data with a third party or fourth party, you need to ask the permission from the customer that you can actually start sharing the data with third party or fourth party or fifth party when it comes to that specific agreement. So when it comes to industrial companies, the agreements are kind of the key for that how you can give more access rights to the data. And so it's good to keep that in mind. And of course, there is now new sort of a legislation coming out from the EU, which will be kind of trying to tackle this problem, that there would be more data, but then of course the contracts play quite an important role when it comes to companies. And because what happened sort of around 2015, there was this paper about from John Deere and car manufacturers, where they said basically that okay, they don't want to sell cars no more, they don't want to sell tractors no more. The reason for that was really that if they own the tractor, when the user is actually using the car or the tractor, then they don't need to ask the permission for the data, because they automatically get the data if they happen to own the car or if they happen to own the tractor that is being used by the consumer or the farmer. But for that, then we've continued from that, and then when it comes to companies, and when we have been advising companies, we have asked them that the question that, okay, what is your data sharing strategy? And before that you can actually move on, it is important sort of to keep in mind that there are a lot of different types of data within the company. There are proprietary data that it's something that you never ever share. There is an inner circle data that is basically the data that you share when it comes to your contract. Then there is distributed data that is a common shared practices between industries, like standards and so on. And then there is finally open data. So basically you need to understand that okay, what type of a data you can actually share with more openly or data that cannot be shared at all. So that was kind of a concept that we sort of advised companies to use over here, and based on that same categorization, we then developed these model terms of contracts for technology industry for the data sharing, that how they should address these sort of a data sharing topics as part of their intellectual property clauses in their contracts. And those sort of those model terms have been basically available over here in Finland since 2019, and they are, I think that they are currently available through the internet. That what has been sort of proposed. At least that paper that it is there, or the picture of the pages. You can at least access that document on the web. Then basically this went on, so companies started changing these contractual arrangements, and then we, of course, that when companies started to share more data with one another, and when new technologies like machine learning was introduced, then basically they were capable of using that data that was shared, for example, about the tractor and all the circumstances where the tractor is actually ongoing. John Deere was basically capable of then developing the autonomous Deere. The difference between the first and the last picture is that there is no driver on the picture. So actually, the data sharing and new data sources, new tools that were implemented as part of the machine learning technologies, then made this possible that nowadays the tractors can actually be sort of run without any drivers and from the centralized office. So basically what then happened was that this type of when this actually industrial data sharing happened, then John Deere was basically capable, together with some 20 to 30. I don't have the actual number, but what I have heard is that there were some 20 to 30 participants in this data sharing cluster of John Deere that actually started sharing data and are basically getting now data from when the deers are being sort of driven on the field. So and that way sort of John Deere was basically capable, and there are a lot of these type of industrial examples. Andritz they have done exactly the same type of an activity around the autonomy of smart wood yards, and then the Sandvik auto mine is another type of an example for this type of a data sharing or data platform and data sharing activity. But I think that the big difference is that if we compare it to the platform economy, that is still that there are contracts in place, there are strict rules in place in these new type of networks, how companies access and how they can use so that the data that it's being gathered by these new autonomous solutions. So this is what basically have been done by these companies when they have implemented platform type of tools, data sharing. They have kind of reached a new level in the product automation in autonomy. The other example that I was planning to show here are two cases that what we have done during the last 8 years. One is Fortum and the other one is Dias. Fortum cases is related to energy industry, and the Dias is related to the construction industry. So I'm going to talk through these cases very, very shortly. So and these cases were done because there was a requirement for new type of a data sharing across the different industrial So imagine sort of the situation that there is a car driving and there is a car stopping at the traffic lights or in the parking place. Currently, what we could do and what requires a totally new type of a data sharing is that how do we connect all the smartness related to all these sort of traffic lights, the car, and the construction in a way that they could transact with one another. So basically, we have communications methodologies available that we can make sort of the smart house and the smart communicate with each other. So a different type of new types of data sharing are being sort of required. In this case, the house is noting that the car is stopping on the traffic lights, and it's signaling to the car that, hey, we have electricity in our storage that we could sell to you. And in fact, there is this type of an under road loop that could be used for transferring the energy that is on the storage of the house to the car. So there is a message that, okay, I can offer this type of a price for you. There can be an algorithm making the decision, or there can be a human making the decision related to that am I going to buy it? Then the machine is making a decision, yes, I want to buy it, and then basically the transform or the energy start floating from the house to the car, and the money will start sort of going directly from the car's account to household's account. So the reason why there are bitcoins on this picture is that this was actually the application that we did for Fortum was built on Ethereum blockchain. And so basically we were just playing around with Ethereum during that period of time and so on. But anyway, when the transaction when the lights turn green again, then the transaction will be settled between sort of these two smart objects. Well, so with today's technology, we can do all this. The problem might be that there is that household and the owner of the car, they don't know each other, they don't have any contracts, they don't have any sort of a system. So basically, and then there is an energy company, they are in the energy industry. The cars they have their own legislation in some other. So there will be this type of a new industrial borders that we need to be capable of crossing if we really want to build this type of a data sharing or transactions between sort of these type of smart objects that are on this example. Then related to this same, so we did another case and which is called DIAS. It's called DIAS.fi, and basically, if you want, you can visit the website, and it's another sort of a type of a blockchain or distributed ledger type of an application where Hyperledger and some other distributed ledger technologies are being used, and there is a specific platform application now for selling houses in Finland. So basically the whole industry have agreed a single workflow for selling house stocks. So as an owner of a house, my ownership is in the digital repository of one of our ministries. So when I want to sell my house, I take that object into this DIAS workflow system, and then I put it on sale. So the industry as a whole, they have design a workflow how that transfer of an ownership can be changed from this old owner to a new buyer. And then when this process is then being completed, the digital asset or the asset will then go back to the repository of a ministry. But again, what is very specific to this is that the data that there are tens of different companies. There are banks participating in this process. There are dealers that are actually selling apartments. There are construction companies. So they are not sharing the data with one another, or they are not sharing the data with all of them. They are basically sharing the data with the ones that are actually participating a certain transaction within the workflow. However, the whole data is there for the system. If for example, the government or somebody else wants to audit then the government can actually do that, and they can see the whole data for these transactions. But basically, what I'm trying to say over here is that we have been moving towards a new type of a sort of a data sharing practices across different type of in the industries, but there is always sort of when it comes to these transactions, there is always an asset or a financial transaction linked to that sort of a data sharing. So there is a clear motivation. So money is also being exchanged during the same time as data is being shared, and then there are every single time there are contractual arrangements in place, either third party, fourth party, or then, for example, this Sandvik and Andritz case, it's a multi-party contracts that where the data sharing practices are being agreed as part of their, as I said earlier, as part of their intellectual property rights clauses. So that's very shortly. So the history, the 50 years of the history of data sharing, from operational efficiencies to strategic opportunities, and now we can finally start seeing that what type of strategic opportunities there have been for industrial companies when they have been adapting platform tools for their specific context, data sharing, and then what type of a contractual arrangement have been made so that the data sharing in a multi-party arrangement have been sort of possible. Questions? I hope I was not using too much of your time.
Yeah, no, thanks, Timo, for the talk, and I mean especially for the insights, the history. I like this kind of historical perspective, and I also like the examples. I mean, we could maybe have a quick round about questions, and then we have a proper discussion after Inke's talk. Maybe there are some specific questions, because I have some specific question, and maybe I can. Are there any other specific questions? Okay, then I have a question. So, I mean, it's an interesting example, or there are interesting examples, and from the examples, it's really, really clear that there is a need of data sharing, because autonomous driving, I mean, there's no way without data sharing. For tractors is maybe okay, but for cars and cities, I mean, of course, data sharing is just a big need, of course. And my question is, can you tell us a little bit more about the key challenges at the moment? Because I was wondering, is it more also about some internal problems, internal discussions? Is data sharing good or not? Is it more a legal problem or technical question, or is it about, or is it on these challenges are on the intersection of technical and legal questions? And maybe you could say a few words about it, and then we have another question by Christian, and then we will go to the next presentation.
Yeah, I think that the biggest problem at this moment of time for many companies is that when they have been selling their machinery all around the world, most of those equipment that have been sold to their customers during the last 30 years, they do not have access to the internet, and so
it's impossible. Data sharing is in many cases impossible.
Exactly. So, for example, the company that I'm currently sort of heading. So basically, for example, we are delivering air conditioning and cooling systems to these big cruise liners. So because they are cruising around the world seas, it is basically impossible to be in touch with them in real time. And the other reason is that currently there are no contracts in place with these customers that how we could access the data. So the biggest obstacle for many industrial companies have been that they do not have a permission from their customers to share data that is coming out from their customer. So the first thing that what we have been advising them to do is really to share really to change their contracts in a way that basically but then again that if they want to move ahead with that one, these companies need to be named. So basically you need to name the company that you're going to share it and for which purpose you are actually going to share. So customers are quite strict on that who you can actually share the data, even though that it is going to be a norm without no labeling in a way. And there is quite a good of a practice what ABB has done around that. ABB have an apps marketplace for data products. So they have this what is it called? It will come to my mind later maybe. So but anyway, they have this data product store that for example, because they have been collecting data from all of their devices around the world. And then they have packaged this data in a way that whenever sort of their customers are building new plants, for example, making new investments, then they can get the data from all ABB customers that how that machine, for example, was used and so on. And they can use it for their next capital investment planning. But ABB they are much more progressed on that how they have agreed with their customers. And there was a study over here in Finland that we did a couple of years ago that only roughly sort of 16 to 20% of the machines that Finnish companies have sold to across the world, they are being connected to the internet. So, but that is basically one of the biggest problems that not all the devices and not all the devices are going to be. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's a combination of course, technical challenges and the legal challenges, and we will come to the legal challenges in a few minutes. But first, we have another question by Christian.
Thank you. Let's see how far the camera works. Yeah, I'm also fascinated by contracts, and in particular contract theory in economics. Super exciting topic, but I'm more interested. I want to ask about Timo about a particular notion. I'm paraphrasing, but I think I'm catching the meaning quite well. That you said that there's always a pecuniary transaction. To what extent have you come across a scope for, for quite remote? I mean, I understand that pecuniary aspects matter ultimately, especially for commercial firms. But what about reporting duties to governments and then subsequent sharing of data? Are there parallels, perhaps also scope for data sharing similar to patent pools, where the pecuniary denomination really is very remote and indirect and ultimately not really the currency in which people trade? What's the scope for that in your experience?
Let me first tell you about the example. It's a European level database for for a medical sort of a verification. So basically, there is a European medical verification database that, for example, all the pharmaceutical companies, they need to report their traceability data into this European level database. And the reason why sort of a pharmaceutical company started doing that was that they want to get rid of a false medicine or medicine that have been made without a permit, and for that database, then the European authorities, they have the access to all the information that all the companies are actually sharing on that database. But then, of course, for the companies, it has no use, because the only thing that what you can see there is basically the data that you have been reporting into this database. But most probably that is a type of a, and the same goes with this DIAS sort of a platform that like I said, that companies are, yes, they are storing data into that, but they do not have access to, except to the transactions that they have participated, and they do not have access to the data to the transactions that they have not participated. But then, of course, the government authorities, they do have access to all the information that is being stored on that database. So if something goes wrong, then it can be, that data can be basically audited, and so I've been quite surprised, in fact, that we have not been sort of treating, for example, algorithms when it comes to AI in a similar way, that we have not been requesting the companies using different type of algorithms to deliver their documents into these type of verification databases, where basically the authorities can actually access this data, but not sort of the other companies that are working, of course, with same kind of algorithms.
Yeah, then thanks Timo, and for sharing your insights. And then let's go to INCA. Let's go more into the details of the legal perspective. INCA, we are very happy that you are here, and now the floor is yours. And then we will have, of course, a discussion at the end of after INCA's talk.
Yeah, thanks a lot for organizing this. So I created a few slides in the INCA format to also promote this as part of output of our Horizon project, in which we are, of course, collaborating. And then I will indeed focus more on the legal perspective, because you can see, especially in the last decade or so, that data sharing and data access is becoming like a common regulatory strategy to promote competition in various markets, and indeed also including platform markets. So if you look at the landscape of data regulation, you actually see that the picture is quite complicated or messy, as Alina said at the very beginning. There's like a whole range of laws that you need to look at in order to understand what are the rules that apply to data sharing. So here at the bottom, you see like more general legal domains that apply across the entire economy. For instance, intellectual property law. Sometimes data sharing indeed interferes with intellectual property rights or trade secret protection. There's consumer laws that also give consumers access to certain data. And there's, of course, also competition laws that when it comes to powerful firms dominating a market, data access could be a remedy that competition authorities can impose to open up a market and to address competition concerns. However, when that involves personal data, you of course also have to keep in mind the privacy of individuals that may be affected by such a data access remedy. So also the General Data Protection Regulation is a relevant regime to keep in mind. The other domains that you see here in the middle are sort of newer legislation that has come up more recently. So there is a free flow regulation for non-personal data that sort of complements the GDPR that focuses on personal data. We have the Data Governance Act, which I will discuss a bit later. And then in the middle, you see the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, which both also have quite a number of data access obligations. So there you also see that in these most recent laws, data access is really used as a strategy to pursue all sorts of public policy objectives, including to open up markets and to create more competition and innovation. And then at the left and the right, you see more specific regimes that apply to specific sectors or specific industries. So for instance, in the financial sector, there's a Payment Services Directive 2, there's an electricity director. In agriculture, there's a code of conduct, which also deals with data access. There's a Data Act, which is about data access for Internet of Things devices. And then most recently, the Commission is working on creating data spaces, which are go a bit more into the direction of, for instance, data commons that was mentioned at the very beginning. So this is just to show you that indeed the picture is quite complicated. And if you want to study data law, you would actually have to look at each of these regimes to figure out which rules apply and also which concepts and which definitions are used. So what I plan to do in my presentation is to just pick out 4 specific examples of these laws to show you what the EU legislator is currently doing, and also illustrating some of the challenges that come up when you want to regulate data access. So my first example is actually an example that goes very much into the direction of considering platform alternatives, which sort of fits nicely with the title of this series, because the Data Governance Act, one of the main parts that it tries to achieve is to set what the EU legislator called the European way of data governance. So basically referring to, in other sectors, having very powerful players that dominate to a large extent a lot of the data that comes from individuals, but also from businesses. So there's quite a high market concentration when it comes to data. And with the Data Governance Act, the EU legislator wishes to embed European values much more in the data economy and make us as citizens and as society less dependent on these large, mainly big tech firms that now dominate the landscape. And data intermediaries is one mechanism by which the Data Governance Act tries to achieve this European way of data governance. You see here an example of Solid, which is an initiative of Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, who at some point got frustrated with the fact that now the web is quite centralized and a lot of the data is in the hands of just a few companies. And what they are setting up with this Solid initiative is sort of platforms that give users control over their data. So you see here that you as an individual have a pod, it's called, which allows you to see which data is out there about you and who has access to that data. Meaning that in the app, you can also control to give someone access to your data or not. So this is a more decentralized way of governing data that would give individuals more control over how their data is used and also who gets access to certain data. So this is an example of such a data intermediary that Data Governance Act is now regulating. However, the regulation of these players is really very strict because of the concerns that the EU legislator saw with these big tech firms. And because of that, there is a requirement of neutrality, meaning that these intermediaries, they can only facilitate data exchanges. They cannot use the data themselves to commercialize it or to offer any additional services, meaning they also can't offer any data analytics services, which makes a lot of sense if you think of it from the perspective of the concern that we now see with these big powerful players. But it also raises the question, how do you then make this business model sustainable? Because how can these data intermediaries make money? One revenue stream could, of course, be to ask individuals to pay for access and to get like a subscription type of model. But the question is whether people are indeed willing to pay for this. So this is one example where you see that indeed EU legislator wishes to create these alternatives in the hope to make the landscape more varied, to give consumers more choice, to give more control over data. But since the regulation is so strict, the question is whether this is a sustainable strategy and whether we will indeed see more of these data intermediaries, because they do exist already, but their use is not as widespread yet. Beyond this, when you also look at the number of obligations that apply to them, it's quite heavy. So here you find just a summary of one provision which lays out what responsibility these data sharing services or data intermediaries have. So they have to be neutral, as already explained, but beyond this, like a whole number of rules applies to them. So they also have, for instance, a responsibility to make sure that access to the services is fair, transparent. They have to prevent transfer to non-personal data that is unlawful. They have to ensure high level of security. They have to comply with competition rules, and they also have to act in the best interest of data subjects. Now, of course, one can argue that this is, of course, needed to make sure that these data intermediaries are trustworthy. But on the other hand, many of the things mentioned here on the slide are quite difficult to interpret. So it's quite hard to know, for instance, whether a data exchange that you're facilitating, whether that complies or not with the competition rules. So it puts quite a high burden on these data intermediaries, where you can again ask the question, does this create enough incentives for these players to actually start offering such services to consumers and businesses? So this is one example where you see that the EU legislator wants to promote alternatives, but so far the regulation is quite strict, where also academics have been criticizing whether this is a good regulatory approach or whether it does not disproportionately affect also the opportunity for these businesses to experiment and to actually build up a market and demand for their services. So this is my first example. Then a second example specifically focuses on these very powerful firms. The Digital Markets Act has been adopted last year. And earlier this year, after the summer, the European Commission designated a number of companies as gatekeepers. So gatekeepers means powerful providers of core platform services. So all the definitions you can find in the DMA, I won't bore you with this, but this graphic shows you sort of the companies that you have to think of, and also the types of services that we deal with. So indeed capturing the markets that are now very much concentrated. And the DMA has a certain number of obligations that are also about data access. And one of them I have mentioned here, because here you also see a challenge that comes up when you regulate data access. So there is one obligation in the DMA that prevents gatekeepers from combining personal data across services unless they have consent of the end users to do this combination. And this basically comes from a German competition case against Facebook, where the German competition authority took action against this. And here you see that a lot of responsibility is actually left with individuals, because the whole purpose of the DMA is to make markets more contestable, more fair. But in the end, if still the majority of end users consents to combining data across Facebook, WhatsApp, for instance, you can argue that then still the markets may not be so contestable. So a question here is whether you can leave up this objective of ensuring market contestability in the hands of the individual end users, or whether the legislator should not have been more strict and to find other ways to restrict this combination of personal data. What recently happened is that Facebook also reacted to this case, this German case that was also decided by the Court of Justice in Luxembourg in the summer, and to the DMA getting into force from in early next year, where they announced that Facebook and Instagram would now offer a subscription where basically users would have a choice either to have a free version of their services without with ads, and so personalized, or a paid for version where they would see no ads. So a question you can ask here is indeed whether this is a desirable outcome of such a law that actually tries to limit the discretion that these big companies have in offering and designing their services. Then the third example that I wanted to mention is the Data Act, and this is actually also a legislation that would apply to the John Deere example that Timo mentioned. The Data Act creates a data access right for users of products and services, so for Internet of Things devices. I will immediately go to this slide because this gives you an idea of what it means. So now the control is a lot with the manufacturers of IoT devices, and the EU legislator was concerned that this would not be a good idea from the perspective of creating competitive and innovative aftermarkets for repair services, for instance, or for like complementary services that can be linked to the device. So what the Data Act does is that it gives you, both as a consumer but also as a business, the right to request data from the manufacturer, and the manufacturer then has to make this data available to you, so that you're no longer dependent on the manufacturer, whether that gives access to the data or not, and to what extent access is given. However, it's not a right that is without restrictions. An addition of this data access right is that you as a consumer or business can also port or transfer this data to a third party. However, there are some restrictions there, and the most important one is that you cannot transfer data under the Data Act to one of the gatekeepers in the Digital Markets Act, with the idea that these are companies that already control a lot of data, and that we should not enlarge this problem with the data access right in the Data Act. However, this was like a heavily discussed restriction in the Data Act that eventually made it to the final text. But there were criticisms that this, of course, limits the autonomy of the individual, because now, even if you wanted to use your data access right to port data from a smart device to one of the gatekeepers, you cannot do that just because this collective goal of not making more of data available to the big techs prevails over your individual autonomy. So here is where you see that the legislator made this choice for the individual, basically limiting the individual's autonomy to achieve a higher goal. So this is also something that comes up when you regulate data access. So what are the conditions of access, and also is it unlimited in the third parties to which you want to move this data? Then slowly getting to the end, like a final example that I wanted to discuss is also because this goes a bit beyond just like legal measures, is the European data spaces. So this is something that the European Commission is now heavily working on. We already have seen proposals for a health data space and a financial data space, but more are coming up in the next years, where the idea is that we want to facilitate data sharing in specific industries. And these are broader measures that go beyond just law, but broader governance frameworks and broader investments in infrastructure to pool data, share data. So it goes more into the direction of data commons, for instance, where you bring together actors in a particular industry to make data sharing more appealing for them. So this is a latest development where you also see that there are some challenges also in how you implement it and how you make these trade-offs between the protection of data from the perspective of intellectual property, the privacy of individuals, and having data sets open for sharing and for reuse. So these are key challenges that will also need to be addressed in these European data spaces. So to come to a conclusion, I listed a couple of challenges here that I think go across any of the types of legislation and policy initiatives that we see with data access. So there is this idea of the European way of data governance. However, is this sustainable? Can we always expect individuals to take responsibility for facilitating data sharing, as the Digital Markets Act, for instance, does? How to deal with trade-offs. So we want to have data sets open, but we also don't want to give up protection of privacy, protection of IP and trade secrets. Then a big issue is also enforcement and the institutions around this. So some of these laws are enforced at the EU level, others are enforced at the national level, some are enforced by more competition or economic law bodies, others are enforced by more privacy bodies. So how will they collaborate, and do they have the required expertise to interpret and to enforce these laws? And then a final one is also, how does the EU compare to policies that are being taken in the US and also in China, which actually take very different perspectives than the EU. And in the EU, there is always this discussion about the Brussels effect. So some laws that are adopted in the EU also have an impact in other jurisdictions, just because global companies find it easier to just use one set of rules. So one question is whether this also will happen in this area with the regulation of data. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm happy to discuss further.
Yeah, thank you very much, INCA, for your deep insights into the legal perspective and for showing us also the messiness of data sharing, and I mean discussing the advantages and disadvantages. And what's the final conclusion? That was one of your questions. And I will, of course, open the floor for all the participants for questions. Do you have any questions? I have some questions, of course, but of course, I will first open the floor. Alina.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentations. It's very interesting. And I'm just really curious about the device, the role of device, the ownership of device that Timo mentioned in his presentation, that it seems to be, it's kind of like a key to the ecosystem of data harvesting. And if we think about at the INCA project, we're thinking about how to support the European local platform alternatives, that can kind of compete with the GAFAM big infrastructural platforms. Do you think that Europe needs to invest into its own device, like into its own, having its own alternative to iPhone and Android phones?
Yeah, it could be. It's more like an industrial policy question. I think that's like underlying maybe some of these initiatives, that indeed Europe does not want to be reliant on only the US or the Chinese options. But so far, indeed, this is not happening yet. So I think now the idea is more to try to regulate these firms, and then also when there would be a European alternative, make sure that alternative also complies with our European values. That is also how I read a lot this idea of the European way of data governance. Like, we would like to have these data companies, for instance, from Europe as well, but they should from the start be built in a way that is aligned with our European fundamental rights, with the values that we think are important. So a question then is, will we see such companies, considering that, for instance, what I mentioned, that the Digital Data Governance Act is really quite strict in its regulation. So that means that, the legislator makes a very strong choice for having these strict regulation, but from a business perspective, maybe this limits the prospect that we would actually have such European alternatives.
Yeah, maybe within a couple of years we do not have a phone. So that's sort of my thinking that within the next 5 to 10 years we are no longer carrying a phone with us. So we just have a pin or something like that connects us to the internet.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective. And there's another question by Christian.
Yes, thank you. Still with the failing camera, sorry for you're not missing much. Now, Inge's list of questions left nothing to be desired. So what I still want to do is like address one issue that perplexes me personally, and maybe you, Inge, or some other participants can help me out there. Now, and that's the issue of monitoring and enforcement, and then the related, well, general issue of transparency. To my understanding, data is a rather fluid commodity, and it's very difficult to trace who had access at what point in time. And unless you, and you can kind of hide the data pool that you're using at some point once you have access, and just one moment is useful. The obvious example is the current debate on generative AI, like ChatGPT, OpenAI, and whether they infringed on copyrights or not, right? And obviously, it's just not the burden of proof is with the legislator and with the rights holders, and that makes it a bit complicated. Another example I had from my own research is that I checked out practices before it was clarified that there were certain exceptions and limitations to copyright for academic researchers. But what they basically did is that they pretended that data mining, text and data mining, would have happened in countries with low rule of law or with lenient copyright regulation, right? And what actually happened had very little to do. So they just needed a partner from a country with low rule of law, so that they could always say, okay, though it's hidden away. So, okay, so you get my meaning: transparency, monitoring, enforcement. Inge or other people, I mean, is this just a paper tiger, or is there something we can actually do to generate the transparency that makes any of this effective?
Yeah, I think you raise good points indeed. How one issue is to have good rules in place. The other issue is to actually be able to enforce them. So I indeed agree with you that this is a real challenge. But I think hopefully there will also be like developments in terms of like more technical ways of monitoring, more automated monitoring, and sort of data science tools that I know some of these authorities are already using to get a better grip on issues like we were discussing today. And I think thinking more from the legal perspective, I think one can also think of reversing the burden of proof. So you could also imagine that if a data holder believes its trade secrets are infringed, that it should show that this is the case and explain what measures can be taken to prevent this. And this is also a bit what the Data Act tries to do, because one of the key concerns there was that at the end, still there would not be a lot of data available for reuse, just because data holders could invoke trade secret protection all the time. And trade secrets are quite a weird type of protection measures I always find, because it's protection that applies when something is commercially valuable because you keep it secret. So it's very hard to understand if someone tells you, no, you cannot use this, it's my trade secret, whether that claim is justified or not. So they try to find a way in the Data Act to balance this and to put the burden more with the data holder to explain what then the data user could do to prevent this, so that still data can be exchanged, but without disproportionately affecting the real trade secret rights. So that is, I think, one key area that needs to be more explained and more researched.
Yeah, I agree with you. So basically the studies that what we have done, 80 to 90% of the company data could be easily put under the umbrella of a trade secret, or a contractual obligation that is also related to the trade secret. So basically, when we did the data categorization for the companies based on those 4 categories, only 5 to 10% drops into this industrial and open data sharing categories. The rest of the data goes into proprietary category and inner circle category. So this is really and then the other problem is really that because the devices are not connected to the internet, so how can you sort of that's another big problem for the companies. But companies can easily manipulate where their data is into which category it belongs to, and most probably that is something that they will continue to do.
Thanks for your perspective. Are there more questions from the auditorium?
Alina put a question in the chat for Timo.
Okay. So maybe then I have a little question, then we will go to Alina's question maybe, because I have a little question to Inge. Because I was curious to hear your more personal perspective about data sharing. I mean, with the recent DMA and DSA and all the legal regulations in the European Union, do we have a good balance between something like allowing for data sharing, because data sharing is of course important, and also restricting data sharing, because that's also an important aim? So I was wondering about your personal perspective about the balance between different aims. And you mentioned, of course, trade-offs, and there are a lot of trade-offs, but I was wondering about your personal idea, what would be a good strategy for the European Union?
Yeah, I think especially with the Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act, they both have a lot of data access obligations, and these are things that are now being implemented. So I think it's really the coming period will really show us how it will work in practice, and also indeed whether companies rely on these trade secret arguments, for instance, or privacy arguments to not open up data sets. So I worked on a report for a think tank earlier this year with 2 co-authors, where we tried to come up with like a set of guidelines or a set of criteria that one could use to find a proper balance between these interests. So to make sure that there is indeed data access where you want to see it, but also when there is valid privacy concerns or IP concerns, that then they would also be taken into account. So I think here it's really important for the enforcers to actually be very critical against these claims of especially the big platforms, because I'm sure that they will invoke these claims, but it's up to the enforcers to actually see if the claims are valid or not, or if they can still find a way to find a compromise between them, because I am more concerned about these obligations not reaching their full potential, because the data sharing will be not enough. So I'm much less concerned about the other way around. But of course, we also need to think of privacy protection. But so far, what I see in this domain is that these claims are often sort of used as a smokescreen rather than a proper claim or I think sometimes more is possible than you would think. So I hope that also this happens in the DMA and the DSA context.
Okay, thanks for sharing your more personal perspective. And then let's probably go to the question in the chat. I mean, there was a question by Alina. It's especially for you, Timo. It's about the role of governance in data sharing. I could read the question. What are the benefits? What are the benefits?
Yeah, I can see the question.
Okay. So yeah.
So basically, for that specific paper, for the distributed governance of the platform that we wrote some years back, we were using how the power relationships within the Bitcoin platform can be mapped with using the Tivana's sort of a power model, and that power model sort of distributed governance is basically, I cannot now remember all the 5 power forces that Tivana was using on that model, but basically we mapped the Bitcoin system according to this Tivana's model, and we identified 5 different power mechanisms between the different stakeholders who's actually bringing value to these different type of power mechanism processes. So that is kind of the way that, or that's if data is being shared openly, or if these transactions are being and shared openly within that platform. So the Tivana's model was quite useful for understanding these power relationships. So I'm encouraging you, if you are not familiar with that model, then I'm encouraging you to read about the Tivana's model, because I think it was quite useful for us when doing all this work. But yeah, so that case is only around the blockchain because we find it interesting during that period of time, but it really doesn't matter what technologies is running the platform. It doesn't have to be a blockchain to do that. So it can be basically any platform could be designed with the same type of rules as the Bitcoin was designed. So yeah, but it's an interesting concept, the distributed governance and those five sort of power processes, how the power between different activities being divided between the different participants on the platform.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective and the very detailed answers about blockchain. I'm also interested in blockchain, but let's go to the audience. Are there any more questions to INCA or to Timo, or in general about data sharing, or legal perspective, or technical perspective, or business perspective? If not, we have some time for some final words. I think we have something like 5 minutes left, and I was wondering about, as you know, I'm interested in a more personal perspective. Of course, as academics, we see the pros and the cons, and that's for sure. And I mean, all ideas, technologies, legal perspectives, they have all pros and cons. But I was wondering about your idea about the future of data sharing. Timo, what do you think? What are the next steps? I mean, you mentioned, for example, that there is a need to connect devices, and INCA mentioned a more critical perspective, because I mean, we have a lot of data already in platforms, and they collect a lot of data. But what is your personal perspective about the future of data sharing when we have this kind of connection of all the devices? I mean, at the end, to compare a bit the critical or more critical perspective about data sharing and a more positive perspective.
Well, basically, some of the projects that we are currently doing are mainly on energy reduction of different applications, and basically we have been sort of sharing quite a lot of an operational data from devices to the manufacturers. However, sort of the next step for building sort of a new types of systems when it comes to manufacturing, we need to sort of integrate the energy systems more directly to the manufacturing systems, so that we can start optimizing, for example, production from the energy efficiency perspective, and so on. So basically, we are heading into new types of areas of data sharing, so that we can basically build new type of systems, and we currently are working on integrating sort of these manufacturing systems more tightly with energy systems, and for those we need sort of a new type of networks, and those networks we are currently building with some industrial companies. But otherwise, these energy savings initiatives or CO2 emission initiatives are not going further if these two systems are not going to be connected to one another.
Yeah, thanks for sharing these ideas and these insights. And maybe I can give more or less the same question to INCA. And I was especially wondering, I mean, of course, about the future about data sharing, it's a really general question. But what do you think about this idea that the more data sharing we have, the more data we have, the better we can solve, I don't know, all the problems of our society? Because that's one of the main arguments also of the big platforms. And I was wondering about your perspective about these questions or this claim, and about your perspective about the future of data sharing, what will come out in the next years.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about whether more data always means that it's better for society, because there I see more and more that sometimes it might also be required even to, like, from a competition or data protection perspective, for companies actually to, like, forget data or to retrain systems in a way that takes out certain biases. So I think this is a question that I think is very interesting to explore in the future. Like, so far, for instance, also in competition cases, we have seen that when there is a problem, the companies are then required to share their data. But I could also imagine that another way of thinking at this would be to require the companies actually to unuse the data or forget the data or untrain their systems. And this is a completely different way of thinking. But that would be an area in which I'm interested in, also from what is possible from a more technical perspective. And then I think a challenge that I see is that from a legal perspective and a policy perspective, this whole field becomes very fragmented. Like I showed you in the first slide, this whole landscape. And I think that's a big issue that will need to be addressed in the future as well. How do all of these different laws apply together? And is it still understandable, especially for small businesses that may want to enter the market, but that are now like completely lost in this whole landscape of different legislations, different initiatives? So it's becoming very, very hard to still keep track of what is happening. And there, one other issue to keep in mind would be whether how in the end all of these different sectoral data spaces that the Commission wants to set up, how they will talk to each other. because in the end, we want to have like a well-functioning market in Europe. But if we work from a too much sector-specific basis, we won't reap the whole potential of having all this data available. So how do these different industries align with each other? How do the laws align? And how can we make sure that also from a technical perspective, it's possible to move data from one industry to another? Because I can see that, with the Internet of Things, it no longer matters so much in which sector you are. At some point, these devices will need to talk to each other. And that's, I think, an area where, again, the more technical perspective meets the more legal or policy perspective. Yeah, so a lot of interesting issues to still keep discussing in the future, I think.
Yeah, that's of course a very good conclusion. There are different perspectives. We have heard different perspectives. It's good to have different perspectives, and we need more discussions about it. So I think we are running out of time. So I would like to say thank you to the speakers, of course. Thank you very much. And I would also like to say thank you to participants, and hopefully we will see us again in one of the next discussion series about platform alternatives, data sharing, and alternative business models. So thanks a lot.